Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Trails Radio Show. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a long time, but welcome to our interview today. Today, my special guest is composer and pianist Mr. Walter Witt. Thank you, and join us in a minute. Okay, well, my first question to you is, how did you get started in your career? How did your career in music and playing piano begin?
Well, first, I'm happy to be with you. I'm happy to be with you, Trey, and with your listeners. I started playing the piano when I was 3 years old. I would run down the stairs at my parents' house and sit at the piano and play arpeggios, which must have made my sister, doing her homework, a little bit exasperated. But I started playing early on, and at about 5, I started to take lessons. And my dad was really my first piano teacher. He was a surgeon, but he was also really an extraordinary pianist and an organist as well. He played at churches. He grew up in Tennessee, and so I listened to my father play since I was born. And I studied with a teacher in Los Angeles. So I grew up in L.A., and my teacher had studied in France. She'd studied with some great pianists, one of whom was Nadia Boulanger, who was a great teacher at the American Conservatory in Fontainebleau, and also with the probably the greatest Chopin specialist, Alfred Cortot. So I had good teachers to start, and I went to college. Mm-hmm. I actually competed quite a bit when I was in high school. I played as a young kid with an orchestra when I was 12. I played the Mozart D minor, so I was moving forward and played a lot of concerts and competitions. I played with the LA Phil as a young man when I was around 15. So I actually was heading into a career in music, but I had other interests, and I was interested in international affairs and history and other academic pursuits. So when I went to Yale, I decided to sort of put my music career on hold, and I went on and ended up going to graduate school and was heading into the Foreign Service. And I guess I had thought at the time that I wasn't really interested in a professional music career, so I pursued the Foreign Service and ended up actually moving into business from the Foreign Service. And my wife and kids, my wife is French, and my children were all born here in Paris, and they're Americans. They were born at the American hospital. And as life moved forward, I thought to myself, Trey, music is really your great love. It's your great passion. And I remember my piano teacher, May Reese, her name was May Reese, and she would tell me, music is your soul, don't forget that. And that stayed with me through my career in business. And I finally decided 10 years ago that it was time to share my music and to go back and to give concerts again. So I went back to the conservatory and got myself polished up and worked with some wonderful teachers here in Paris at the Rachmaninoff Conservatory. And then I began to give concerts in Paris, and it just moved forward. I guess you could say it snowballed from there. So I became focused on Chopin and Gabriel Fauré, and Claude Debussy, all of whom I love very much, and also started to compose. So it's really been actually only about 10 years, and I would say even more, 5 or 6 years since I've been really full-time concert piano. And so life has a way of moving in directions that you don't always expect, but you have to go back and go back to your original passions and really pursue them. I think that's so important. It's a very important lesson in life.
Absolutely. If you have the passion for it, go for it. If you have the passion, you're not going to lose it.
That's right.
And music, it's wonderful. Music is the universal language. It's everywhere in the world.
It is, and it's so wonderful because a funny story is I used to work in Japan. I worked all around the world. I worked in Africa and the Middle East, but also in Asia. And in Japan, I remember going and playing with my business delegations, the piano in hotels in Japan. And the response of people who would come and sit down and in the lobby, and even my colleagues, many of whom were quite formal, but I would sit down and play after a dinner, a business dinner, for instance, and it would have a crowd in the lobby. And all through my career, no matter what capital or city I would be in, I'd always find a piano to play. So I guess you could say that I've actually been a concert pianist for about 25, 26 years.
Yeah, well, that's great that you enjoy it, and you'll never get rid of it, as long as you're able to play, you'll still do it your whole life. And do you have any upcoming projects in France, or do you do concerts still internationally, or anything upcoming?
Well, I have an exciting concert, which unfortunately, of course, was canceled because of the pandemic, and it was going to be at the Salon Pleyel, which is a very famous concert hall here in Paris. And as another concert, sort of as an intimate, smaller event, I was going to be playing at the original building where Chopin gave his debut concert in 1832, less than 1 year after he arrived as an immigrant to France. And it would be in the same room where Chopin gave his concert. And in fact, it would be in the exact same spot. That's where the piano is placed. And unfortunately, it was canceled due to the COVID pandemic. However, it's going to be rescheduled once the situation allows it to be. And then after that, I'd planned to give a concert back in Los Angeles for a benefit concert. It would be actually for an Alzheimer's association. So I'm still planning to come out to California and to give that concert. And then from there, we have a few things in Poland, which are now going to be rescheduled. But of course, so much has been on hold now because of the situation. But hopefully I'll give an online concert. I think that's the next step. I'll give a concert online to my followers and people who are interested in listening to me. And I'm planning that for June, this coming month.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything has been sadly put on hold and canceled due to the pandemic, but people have been finding a way around it, online now, it's...
It's so sad because people need music and culture. I mean, opera has been canceled here in Paris, and movie theaters are just opening up again in France. And of course, the Philharmonic in France was canceled. The entire season's been canceled. But I'm hopeful that the situation will improve, and people need music. They need culture. They need a way to express their emotions, especially at a time like this. It's critical.
Absolutely. Music has been in our lives for so long, we can't remember, and, yeah. Hopefully this pandemic ends soon and we can get back to our lives as we can,
That's right. Yeah, I think that, as a musician and as an artist, you can retreat into your shell, so to speak, and you can perfect a piece or learn new pieces, and also you can now go online, and that's a very important part of a musician's life, is to spend time quietly in isolation. A musician's life is really in some ways quite solitary, because you have to dedicate the time to not just to learning new pieces and improving yourself technically, which people always think about, but it's really more a research that you're constantly doing to improve your tone and to improve your interpretation. It's a constant research. It's a constant effort. And it is a very solitary life in some ways. But of course, the joy is, for me at least, is to share my music. And people respond to it differently. It's always a joy to see how differently people respond to Chopin, an etude, or to a ballade by Chopin.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always nice when the audience or the fans, react to your work. You can't do your work without the fans,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's very much like theater, where I'm from theater acting. It's very much when you're performing on stage and get the reaction. And it's like music, too, in concerts and stuff. They're reacting to what you're playing.
Yes, it improves your work. It improves your performance, as you know very well yourself. It's something which it's a two-way street. It really is. I like a small audience. I've always preferred smaller audiences. Maybe 100 people is a nice size. And I gave a concert this last year at the library for the Polish community here in France. It's called the Polish Library of Paris. And it houses the collection of Chopin's personal effects, his manuscripts, some of his music, a piano he played on. And it was about 75 people, and it was just a joy because people really connected to Chopin and Fauré and the music, and you feel as if you're communicating with each person individually.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's very important, connecting with individually, one-on-one. Yeah. It makes the audience in tune to you more special.
It does, and I have a phrase, Trey, which I like to repeat to myself, and people ask me, what's your mission, what's your goal in music? And I tell them to move someone else's heart after moving my own. And I think that really sums it up. You have to communicate your own emotions and the intent of the composer and your own passion. But the goal, of course, is to have one person who feels what you're feeling, and that's very important. It's very important to keep that in mind when you're giving concerts again and again and again. It has to be a renewal of the experience each time you play, bringing something new to your performance. Very important.
Absolutely, very, very important. My next question is, what do you find is the most challenging or most difficult part for you throughout your career and your profession? What do you find is the most challenging?
I think, Trey, it's in some ways what I said, but I can expand on it. I think it's so important to refresh and to renew what can sometimes be, and in any career, it can be if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're working, in a construction site. Every day we all have our routines, and we all have our way of organizing our day. And if we do it day in and day out, sometimes it can get repetitive and it can get stale, no matter how passionate the work is. And I think it's so important in a performance career, music, theater, or whatever you're doing, and in any profession, is to constantly search for a new idea and to put sort of a new perspective on what you're doing. It can be the same thing. I could be playing the same piece. I can play Chopin's Barcarolle, for instance, and I played that piece since I was 18. But you have to always try and discover something new. And that means both within yourself, but also in the way you approach your work and the way that you actually communicate your work. It's very important, especially in a performance career.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always room for practice. You never stop learning. And, it's always... Because if you stop learning and say you don't need to practice anymore, then that's no good, because there's always room to learn. And I'm sure for you, after each performance, the next performance, you want to improve more, make it better.
It's so true. And I see other pianists and artists, musicians, who fall into that trap of staying with the same programs or becoming bored really with what they're doing, remarkably so, because they don't sort of try and look at it a new way. And another thing that's important too, which I'd like to mention, is that you have to try different angles of what you're doing in your career. For instance, with the pandemic, I decided to focus on my composing. And I'd written about 12 or 13 songs and some other small works, pieces that I liked over the years, and hadn't focused too much on that, but I focused very heavily on a new, longer work, a more structured work, and I really focused on my composing. And also, I focused on writing. I focused on